Don't let Grandpa drive the kids, my dad whispered urgently. His medication, he's not the same person. I thought he was overreacting to normal aging. I was wrong. When I discovered what my family had been hiding about Grandpa Harold for months, I realized this wasn't about medication at all, and my children had been in danger every single time I'd trusted him with them. It was supposed to be a simple Saturday in late October, one of those crisp autumn days in Willowfield where the leaves crunch under your feet and the air smells like wood smoke and possibility. Drop the kids off at Grandpa Harold's house on Maplewood Drive, run some errands without tiny humans asking for snacks every 5 minutes, maybe grab a coffee that I could actually finish while it was still hot, then pick them up by dinner. Easy. Normal. The kind of predictable weekend routine that keeps a working mother's life from completely falling apart. I'd been looking forward to this Saturday for weeks. Between my job at Riverside Marketing and the kids' soccer schedules, piano lessons, and the general chaos of being a single mom, these few precious hours of freedom felt like winning the lottery. Emma, my 6-year-old firecracker, had been talking about showing Grandpa Harold her new drawings all week. Tyler, my thoughtful 8-year-old, had packed his backpack with 3 different books because he couldn't decide which one Grandpa would like best for their Saturday reading time. The drive to Grandpa Harold's house was exactly 12 minutes from our apartment on Cedar Street. I knew because Tyler had timed it obsessively during his mathematician phase last summer. Emma was bouncing in her booster seat, chattering about whether Grandpa would let them help make his famous grilled cheese sandwiches. Tyler was quietly organizing his backpack for the 3rd time, making sure his books were in the right order. "Mommy, do you think Grandpa still has those puzzles we didn't finish last time?" Emma asked as she pressed her face against the window as we turned onto Elm Avenue. "I'm sure he does, sweetheart. Grandpa Harold never throws anything away, especially not puzzles." It was true. Grandpa Harold's house was like a museum of childhood memories, filled with board games from the 1970s, puzzles missing exactly one piece, and books that smelled like vanilla and old paper. He lived in the same ranch-style house for 43 years, ever since he'd married my grandmother Dolores. Even after she passed away 5 years ago, he'd kept everything exactly the same, as if she might walk through the front door at any moment and want to finish the crossword puzzle she'd left on the kitchen table. My dad, Raymond, had been spending more time at Grandpa Harold's house lately. "Helping with yard work," he'd say. Though at 74, Grandpa Harold had always been fiercely independent about his lawn care. I had assumed it was just the normal progression of things. Adult children checking in more frequently, making sure everything was okay, maybe helping with the heavier stuff. When I pulled into the familiar driveway on Maplewood Drive, I could see Dad through the kitchen window, and something about his posture looked different, tense. His shoulders were rigid in a way that reminded me of how he used to stand when he was watching me perform in school plays, like he was bracing for something to go wrong. The house itself looked exactly the same as always. Grandpa Harold had painted the shutters forest green last spring, and they still looked crisp against the white siding. The flower beds Grandma Dolores had planted were dormant now, but he'd kept them meticulously weeded. A small American flag hung from the porch, and I could see the familiar silhouette of his Cardinals baseball cap through the screen door. I was getting Emma and Tyler out of their car seats, a process that involved Tyler's systematic checking of his backpack contents and Emma's inimitable discovery that she'd forgotten something crucial in the car, when Dad appeared at my car door faster than I'd ever seen him move. "Claire," he said quietly, glancing toward the house where Grandpa Harold was now visible on the front porch, waving at us with his characteristic broad smile. "Don't let him drive the kids anywhere today." I paused, Tyler's backpack halfway out of the car. "What? Why?" The question felt automatic, but even as I asked it, something cold settled in my stomach. Dad never interfered with Grandpa Harold's time with the kids. If anything, he usually encouraged it, saying it was good for all of them. Grandpa Harold was the kind of grandfather who still got down on the floor to play with action figures, who remembered which cartoon characters were currently cool, who never said no to ice cream before dinner when it was just him and the grandkids. Dad's voice dropped to an urgent whisper, his eyes darting between me and the house. His medication, he's not the same person anymore. Just, please, keep them here at the house today. I looked over at Grandpa Harold, 78 years old, standing there in his familiar uniform. The Cardinals baseball cap I'd bought him 3 Christmases ago, the navy cardigan with the leather patches on the elbows that he wore every weekend, and the reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. He looked exactly the same as always. Maybe a little thinner, which I'd attributed to the grief diet that seemed to be a permanent fixture since Grandma Dolores's death. But still, fundamentally the man who'd taught me to ride a bike in this very driveway and made the world's best pancakes on Sunday mornings. Dad, he's been driving for 60 years, I said. But something in Raymond's eyes made me stop mid-sentence. It wasn't just concern. It was fear. Real, bone-deep fear that I'd never seen in my father before. "What medication?" I asked, lowering my voice further. I didn't know he was on anything new. Dad glanced toward the house again. Through the screen door, I could see Grandpa Harold helping Emma out of her jacket. Perfectly normal grandfather behavior. "We'll talk later," he said. "Just promise me, no driving." I wanted to ask more questions. I wanted to know why this was the first I'd heard about any medication issues, why Dad looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, why the simple act of dropping my children off at their grandfather's house suddenly felt like navigating a minefield. But the kids were already calling for me to come see something, and Grandpa Harold was waving us both toward the house with his characteristic warmth. "Okay," I said finally. "No driving. But we're talking about this later." Dad nodded, relief flooding his features. "Thank you. I'll explain everything once the kids aren't around." I walked toward the house with a smile plastered on my face, hugging Grandpa Harold and complimenting him on how good the house looked, how nice the yard was, how excited the kids were to spend the day with him. All the normal pleasantries that had been part of our Saturday routine for years. But underneath the surface, alarm bells were ringing in my head. In 32 years of life, I'd never seen my father look scared of his own father. Raymond and Grandpa Harold had always had an easy relationship, built on mutual respect and shared interests in baseball, old movies, and complaining about the weather. If Dad was worried enough to intercept me at my car and extract promises about driving restrictions, something was seriously wrong. As I got ready to leave, Grandpa Harold walked me back to my car, just like he always did. His arm around my shoulders felt the same as it had my entire life. Steady, warm, protective. He asked about my job, about whether I was dating anyone, about if I needed any help with anything around my apartment. All the same questions he'd been asking since my divorce 2 years ago. "You take care of yourself, sweetheart," he said, kissing my forehead. "Those kids are lucky to have such a good mama." I hugged him back, breathing in the familiar scent of Old Spice and coffee that meant safety and unconditional love my entire life. "Love you too, Grandpa." But as I drove away, watching him wave from the porch in my rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. The man I just hugged seemed completely normal, but my father had looked at him like he was a stranger wearing Grandpa Harold's face. I spent the morning running errands with Dad's words echoing in my head. His medication, he's not the same person anymore. What medication? For what condition? And why was this the first I'd heard about any of it? By the time I finished grocery shopping and picked up my dye cleaning, I'd convinced myself that Dad was probably overreacting. Aging is hard, and maybe Grandpa Harold was prescribed something that made him a little drowsy or confused. It wouldn't be the first time an elderly person had a bad reaction to new medication. The responsible thing would be to have a conversation with Grandpa Harold's doctor, maybe adjust the dosage, monitor the situation more closely.
But that didn't explain the fear in Dad's eyes. That didn't explain why he'd looked like he was watching a ticking bomb instead of his own father playing with his grandchildren. When I returned to pick up Emma and Tyler that afternoon, I was planning to sit down with Dad and get the full story. Whatever was going on with Grandpa Harold's medication, we could handle it as a family. We could find solutions, make adjustments, and ensure everyone's safety without making it a bigger deal than it needed to be.
I had no idea this moment would save my children's lives. I had no idea that by the time I learned the truth about what my family had been hiding, everything I thought I knew about the people I trusted most would be completely shattered. I had no idea that Grandpa Harold's medication problem was the least of our worries. And I definitely had no idea that this ordinary Saturday in Willowfield would be the beginning of the most terrifying discovery of my life. As I pulled back into the driveway on Maplewood Drive, I could see Emma and Tyler through the living room window, safe and happy, showing Grandpa Harold something on one of Tyler's books. Dad was nowhere to be seen, which was unusual. He typically helped load the kids back into the car and chatted for a few minutes before I left. But the house looked peaceful. The kids looked content. Grandpa Harold looked like the same loving grandfather he'd always been. Sometimes the most dangerous situations are the ones that look completely normal on the surface. Sometimes the people who love us most are the ones keeping the most dangerous secrets. And sometimes trusting a whispered warning from someone who's never lied to you before is the only thing standing between your family and absolute disaster. I was about to learn all of these lessons the hard way. For 3 years, every other Saturday had been sacred. Ever since my divorce from Jake became final and I'd moved into the apartment on Cedar Street with Emma and Tyler, Grandpa Harold's house had been our sanctuary. It started as emergency babysitting. I was drowning in single motherhood, working full-time at Riverside Marketing while managing soccer games, school plays, and a budget that never stretched far enough. Dad suggested the kids spend Saturday mornings with Grandpa Harold. He's been lonely since Mom passed, Raymond had said about Grandma Dolores' death 5 years earlier, and you need a break. Win-win. What began as desperation became the highlight of everyone's week. Grandpa Harold would prepare for days, stocking Tyler's favorite hot chocolate and Emma's art supplies. He'd plan treasure hunts in his backyard, build elaborate Lincoln log structures, or set up his old slide projector to show pictures from when Dad was young. The house on Maplewood Drive became our extended living room. I knew exactly which cabinet held the good cookies, where he kept his National Geographic collection, and which chair had perfect reading light. Emma claimed the sunroom window seat as her art studio. Tyler organized Grandpa Harold's books into his own logical system. More importantly, those Saturday mornings gave me back pieces of myself I'd lost during marriage. I could grocery shop without negotiating every item, run errands without checking the time constantly, or simply sit in a coffee shop reading like a normal adult. It was the difference between surviving and living. Grandpa Harold had been more than free childcare. He was our lifeline. After Jake left, Tyler barely spoke, retreating into books and refusing to engage. Emma developed anxiety about me leaving for work, terrified I wouldn't return like Daddy had. But Grandpa Harold's steady presence slowly drew them out. He never asked probing questions about the divorce or criticized my parenting. He never suggested I should date again or wondered if the kids needed more stability. He just showed up week after week with unconditional love and endless patience. Tyler learned to trust adults again through Grandpa Harold's kept promises. If he said they'd finish a puzzle next time, it would be waiting exactly where they'd left it. Emma rediscovered confidence through his genuine amazement at her artwork, displaying every drawing on his refrigerator like a museum curator. I learned to accept help without guilt. Grandpa Harold never made me feel like I was failing for needing those breathing room hours. He never kept score or made comments about how much he was doing. He just loved us, simply and completely. The routine was sacred.
Every other Saturday at 9 a.m., I'd drive 12 minutes to Maplewood Drive and hand them over to the world's best grandfather. He'd have coffee waiting, would ask about my week with genuine interest, and always sent me off with something: leftover soup, garden tomatoes, or a book he thought I'd enjoy. At 4 p.m., I'd return to find them engaged in elaborate projects: Emma covered in paint, Tyler explaining fascinating facts from Grandpa Harold's encyclopedias, and Grandpa Harold right in the middle, as energetic as an 8-year-old himself. The consistency had been everything. In a life turned upside down by divorce and starting over, those Saturdays were our constant. Proof that some good things could be counted on, that some people showed up no matter what, that family could be strength instead of stress. Which is why Dad's warning that morning felt like the ground shifting. I'd grown up in Willowfield. My childhood was remarkably stable, middle class, predictable, filled with family dinners and Little League games. Mom and Dad were married 38 years before she passed from cancer when I was 26. They had the kind of relationship that made marriage look easy. Grandpa Harold was constant throughout my childhood. He'd retired from the electric company when I was 10, making him available for school pickups, soccer games, and spontaneous adventures that made childhood magical. He taught me to fish at Thompson Lake, helped with science fair projects, and enthusiastically attended every school play and piano recital. Even during my rebellious teenage years, when everyone else seemed impossibly annoying, Grandpa Harold remained my ally. He took my side about dyeing my hair purple at 16. He taught me stick shift in his old Ford pickup, patiently enduring grinding years and panicked stalling. He told me I was smart enough for college when my guidance counselor suggested more practical options.
When I brought Jake home, Grandpa Harold was polite but reserved. Later, he pulled me aside. "That boy doesn't know how lucky he is." The closest thing to criticism I'd ever heard him voice. I should have paid attention. After Emma was born, Grandpa Harold transformed. He showed up at the hospital with a stuffed elephant bigger than the baby, learned to change diapers with dedication, and rocked her to sleep with gentleness that brought tears to my eyes. When Tyler arrived, somehow both kids became his absolute favorite. Even Grandma Dolores's death hadn't changed his fundamental nature. He grieved deeply, but remained the same steady, loving presence. If anything, his relationship with Emma and Tyler became more precious. They were his connection to the future, his reminder that life continued after loss. So when Dad intercepted me with warnings about Grandpa Harold not being the same person anymore, it felt like he was describing a stranger. The man I'd hugged goodbye seemed exactly like himself. Maybe more tired, but fundamentally the grandfather who'd been reliable for 32 years. But Dad didn't make things up. Raymond Mitchell was the most straightforward person I knew. He said what he meant what he said, never prone to drama or exaggeration. If he was worried enough to extract promises about driving restrictions, something was genuinely wrong. As I drove around Willowfield that morning, I tried piecing together missed signs. 2 weeks ago, Tyler mentioned Grandpa Harold got confused about which book they'd been reading. He started the one we finished, but then remembered. I'd chalked it up to normal absent-mindedness. The week before, Emma came home saying Grandpa Harold made lunch but couldn't remember if he'd fed them, so we got 2 grilled cheese each, she'd announced, delighted by the unexpected treat. I found it amusing rather than concerning. Now, driving past familiar landmarks, my old high school, the park where I learned to bike, the ice cream stand where Grandpa Harold took me every summer, I saw those incidents differently. The coffee shop on Riverside Avenue was next to the bookstore where I'd worked during college. I ordered my usual caramel latte with extra shot, found a window table, but felt unsettled instead of relaxed. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Lauren in Denver. "How are Saturday shenanigans going? Did Grandpa Harold build another epic blanket fort?" I stared at her message, unsure how to respond. How could I explain Dad's warning without sounding alarmist? How could I describe the fear in his eyes without concrete information? "Everything's fine," I typed. "Kids having a great time as always." Not exactly a lie, but not the whole truth. The kids were having fun, probably deep in some elaborate game. But something definitely wasn't fine. I spent an hour researching medication side effects instead of relaxing. Blood pressure medications, heart conditions, depression, anxiety, sleep disorders all came with potential confusion, disorientation, behavior changes, impaired judgment. Some caused hallucinations. Others affected motor skills and reaction times. If Grandpa Harold was experiencing any of these, Dad's driving concern made perfect sense. But why hadn't anyone told me? Why learn this through whispered driveway warnings instead of family discussions about options and solutions? Our Saturday routine, the thing that had been stability and sanctuary for 3 years, was never going to be the same again. And I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. When I returned to pick up Emma and Tyler that afternoon, I was ready to dismiss Dad's morning panic as overprotective worry. Maybe Grandpa Harold was a little slower, maybe he'd mixed up a medication dosage, but surely it wasn't as serious as Raymond had made it seem. The kids burst through the front door with their usual Saturday energy. Emma clutched a new drawing, a family portrait with everyone holding hands under a rainbow. Tyler carried a small wooden airplane Grandpa Harold had helped him build from a kit they'd been working on for weeks. "Mom, look what we made!" Emma thrust her artwork toward me. "Grandpa Harold said it's the best drawing he's ever seen. And my plane actually flies!" Tyler demonstrated with a careful toss across the living room. Grandpa Harold explained all about aerodynamics and lift, and everything seemed perfectly normal. Through the doorway, I could see Grandpa Harold cleaning up craft supplies from the kitchen table, moving with his usual methodical precision. Dad was helping, but he looked relaxed now, chatting about something that made Grandpa Harold chuckle. Maybe I'd been overthinking everything. Maybe Dad's concern had been a momentary worry, quickly resolved once he'd spent the day observing. People had bad days, forgot things, got confused sometimes. It didn't necessarily mean anything catastrophic. "Did you have fun today?" I asked, crouching down to Emma's level. "The best day ever," she announced. "We made cookies and built a fort, and Grandpa Harold taught me how to whistle." She demonstrated with a breathy attempt that was more air than sound, but her pride was unmistakable. Tyler nodded enthusiastically. "And he remembered exactly where we left off in our book yesterday. He never forgets anything important." I felt some of the morning tension ease. Whatever Dad had been worried about, it clearly hadn't affected the kids' experience. They'd had their usual magical Saturday, full of attention, creativity, and unconditional love. Grandpa Harold appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "There's my Claire Bear," he said, using the nickname he'd called me since I was Emma's age. "How was your morning of freedom?" "Relaxing," I lied smoothly. "Thank you so much for watching them. Sounds like you had quite the adventure."
Always do with these two. He ruffled Tyler's hair affectionately. "Same time next week?" The question was so routine, so normal, that I almost said yes automatically. But I caught Dad's eye over Grandpa Harold's shoulder, and something in his expression made me hesitate. "Actually," I said carefully, "maybe I'll stick around next Saturday. Make it a family day." I watched Grandpa Harold's face for any reaction: confusion, disappointment, suspicion. Instead, he just smiled warmly. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. The more the merrier." As we gathered the kids' belongings and prepared to leave, I convinced myself that Dad's morning warning had been unnecessary. Yes, elderly people sometimes had medication adjustments that caused temporary confusion, but Grandpa Harold seemed completely himself, engaged, loving, responsible. I was wrong about everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.